Instead of talking about how to win the culture war, I'm going to talk about how to lose the culture war. And for that, I need a new hat. Attach this. Hello there, I'm Screwtape. C.S. Lewis's famous fictional demon, a senior tempter from the Screwtape Letters. And I'm giving advice to Wormwood, who is my junior associate and student, about how to tempt the Catholic Church, which is the only thing that stands in the way of the total collapse of Western civilization into a swirl of garbage down the drain. It may be a little confusing to you to follow Screwtape's line of thinking here because everything's upside down. For instance, when the devil refers to God, he uses the name of the enemy. So maybe you should stand on your head while you listen, at least mentally. Fortunately, this doesn't fit very well. My sweetly bitter, beautifully ugly, and virtuously vicious demon Wormwood, I give you today from my superior and successful wisdom 7 basic ideas which you must keep planting in the minds of American Catholics so that they can continue to lose the culture wars that they have been losing quite spectacularly for the last 4 or 5 decades. These 7 ideas are, in a single word each: 1, politicizing their faith; 2, demanding continuous happy talk even as they swirl down the drain; 3, the worship of organization and treating religion as a business; 4, the worship of fads and fashions and social acceptability, worship of the new; 5, the abolition of excellence and the worship of egalitarianism, especially sexually; 6, materialism, consumerism, worldliness, materialism, and yuppiedom; and 7, substituting spirituality for sanctity. You can remember these 7 by the acronym PHONEYS, phonies: politicization, happy talk, organizationalism, new worship, egalitarianism, yuppiedom, and spirituality. They are 7 roads from the real to the phony. The whole strategy of hell, of course, is to get souls out of the real, the authentic, the true, and into the unreal, the phony, the false. Our enemy is being itself, because God is perfect, infinite, unlimited being. Now, there are many roads from the heavenly heights of being down to the hellish depths of non-being, and those who travel on those roads become more and more unreal, in other words, phonies. So here are 7 ways to turn Catholics into phonies. These are not the only 7 roads, of course, but they are 7 that have worked very well for us for the last 40 or 50 years. They are part of our master plan. Now, Wormwood, you must take great care not to let our secret out, not to let any troublemaker reveal what we're actually doing to them, namely convincing them to embrace 7 ways to gradually commit spiritual suicide. So don't let them read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. I don't know how he sneaked that out. He must have a spy in the war room in hell somewhere. So here are 7 ways to turn Catholics into phonies. First, politicization, the P word. We have persuaded Americans to treat their religion as a kind of politics, and their politics as a kind of religion. For instance, in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, the Catholic Church used to be known as the Democratic Party of Prayer. Treating politics religiously is, of course, a form of idolatry. And all forms of idolatry are delightfully helpful to us, so it doesn't matter to us whether they worship the donkey or the elephant, as long as they don't worship the enemy. You see, they have to absolutize politics because they have relativized religion. Everybody needs an absolute somewhere. So we have persuaded many of them to judge their faith by the standard of political correctness, rather than vice versa. To relativize the supernatural and the absolute, and to absolutize the natural and the political. That is, one particular political agenda. Doesn't matter which one. And even if they do fight an important culture war issue as an absolute value, like abortion or marriage or the sexual revolution, even the traditionalists can easily be tempted to use their religion to justify their political goals. You see, the trick is to get them to focus all their energy and passion on political success regarding that single issue, and have them treat the rest of their faith as a mere means to that end. So even if their faith is good, and if that end is good, if they reverse the means in the end, we've got them into idolatry. The best thing about politicization is that it can make them sacrifice concrete persons to their abstract, impersonal political cause. And that can even make them believe that they're saints and heroes of charity because their hearts bleed for people they've never met in some faraway place, even while they're neglecting the people closest to them, especially their family. In other words, have them love humanity instead of their neighbors. You'll be surprised how easy it is to get them to the state of mind where they are genuinely shocked if someone points out to them that not once does their Bible ever tell them to love humanity. Humanity, that glimmering, glorious, abstract cloud of idealism. No, it always tells them to love their neighbor, that humdrum, ordinary, inconvenient, unspectacular idiot they live with. Get them to practice what Charles Dickens called telescopic philanthropy, as if they were looking at the world through the wrong end of a telescope, seeing things that are near as far away, and things that are far away as near, so that the farther away and the more global and abstract anything is, the more passionately concerned they are about it. Some vague cause, not their neighbor. Above all, keep them focused on what other people ought to do. Don't let any of them make themselves the object of their passion. Don't let them demand of themselves that they become saints. You might suggest to them that that would be selfishness to work passionately for their own perfection of charity. Of course, that's silly. That's the biggest lie in the world, since the essence of sainthood and charity is unselfishness. But as one of our most successful disciples, Adolf Hitler, so brilliantly taught, people can often be suckered in by the big lie more easily than by little lies. My second principle is happy talk. Let them always talk up the achievements, the success, the progress that their church has made in the last 40 years. They insist that the church in America is healthy, even though the statistics are devastating. Keep them at this relentlessly, nose to the grindstone. Keep that bland smile on their faces. Make them forget that they are prophets. And if they remember, make them think that it's socially profitable to be a prophet. Of course, that's another really big lie. That's what makes it so delightful to us. Keep the laity ignorant of the facts if you can. And if you can't keep the facts out of their mind, keep them out of their wills, so that even though their minds are not ignorant, their wills will ignore the cultural abomination of desolation that has removed half the church's priests, 2/3 of its nuns, 9/10 of its children's theological knowledge, belief in the real presence among 70% of American Catholics, decreased mass attendance from 75% to 25%, confession even more, and destroyed Catholic families at the same rate as non-Catholic families, since these Catholics abort and contracept and sodomize and fornicate and divorce and sexually abuse and even murder at exactly the same rate as non-Catholics. Thus, contribute to the gradual suicide of their society through the attack on its single most fundamental foundation, the family. So, amidst this devastation, keep them happy talking. Keep them saying peace, peace when there is no peace, like the false prophets in the Bible. Keep them pretending that the battlefield they live on is really a playground, and that those bullets are really butterflies. And those landmines are really the yellow brick road to the land of Oz, as they blandly celebrate themselves in songs about how they, not God, are building the city of God in an orgy of universal tolerance and non-judgmentalism. In other words, persuade them to be spiritual chamberlains at Munich. Make them ignore their own scripture's most obvious and all-pervasive theme of spiritual warfare. That will give us, their real enemies, the tremendous military advantage of surprise when they deny our very existence. The third principle is organizationalism. They must be made to see their church as an organization, not an organism. That is, a business, not a mystery. They must all be persuaded to be Marthas, not Marys. To worry about programs and committees and numbers and, of course, success. They must come to reverse Mother Teresa's most famous maxim about God not putting them into this world to be successful, but to be faithful. They must worship success, not sanctity, and to fear failure, not sin. To that end, they must treat the church as a business, without asking what the business is for, so that they can keep busy turning the wheels and gears of the organization. Keep them at the slavery of constant activism, like Martha, and make them think that this is the essence of charity. Never let them fall into the countercultural idea of Mary, who just sat at the feet of the enemy and listened. If they must pray, keep them talking all the time, keeping the enemy up to date about what is needed as they see it, advising the enemy about how his business ought to be run, and correcting any of his strange ideas that they don't understand. Don't let them just sit there and listen. Fortunately, we have arranged it so that it is very difficult for them to find any literal silence anywhere in their lives anymore. There is always some TV or background music in their minds, if not in their ears. Don't let them read a poem like W.H. Auden's 1939. Faces along the bar cling to their average day. The lights must never go out, the music must always play, lest we know where we are, lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the dark, who have never been happy or good. That's too scary, they don't like to read that. Don't let them. If they do, they might see themselves in that bleak picture, and then turn and seek out silence and become contemplatives. That's one of the most socially dangerous things they could possibly do. Simply practicing the presence of the enemy, simply adoring him, letting his mind and will mysteriously form theirs. That's what that other Mary did with her fiat, let it be done. And the result was disastrous. Don't let them believe that that was meant to continue. The fourth principle I call neo-worship, the worship of the new, the fashionable. Let them substitute new for true. Let them tell the truth with the clock. After all, what's new is easily answered by the holy writ of their newspapers. While Pilate's question, what is true, can trail off safely into skeptical space, even when it literally is addressed to the face of truth himself, standing right there in front of him. If they do come to admit the reality of the culture war and of the need for spiritual warfare, at least you can persuade them to ignore all the strongest weapons that heaven has provided for 2,000 years against the principalities and powers of hell by dismissing these as pre-Vatican II. That would include the Bible, the Mass, the Eucharist, Eucharistic adoration, frequent confession, traditional devotions to Mary like the Rosary, negative ideas like sin and repentance and sacrifice and fasting and mortification, and the infallibility of divine revelation and dogma itself and the lives of the saints and even the creeds, all of which are pre-Vatican II. So is Jesus Christ himself. So is the universe by about 13.7 billion years. So you see, that's another really big lie. And they lap it up like good little lapdogs. Of course, Vatican II itself continually refers to and bases everything it says on pre-Vatican II things. But you can persuade them to ignore that uncomfortable fact, since they don't actually read the documents of Vatican II, but they rather read the books of heretics who tell them what the church really said, that it was almost exactly the opposite of what she really did say. And they actually believe their big media mouths, which we have so massively manipulated, because they worship the new. And they worship the new because they believe the big media mouths, the chattering classes. A perfect example of hell's logic, arguing in a circle, like a snake swallowing its own tail. Fifth, have them believe that egalitarianism is the highest wisdom everywhere, even regarding the thing that they are the most passionate about, which is now sex. The enemy invented this dangerous thing, of course, and made men and women superior and inferior to each other. Men vastly superior to women at being men, and women vastly superior to men at being women. In fact, this is one of their greatest passions, the otherness of the other. But we have contrived to label this invention of the enemy sexism, and to persuade them that they are really not superior or inferior at all, but equal. Thus, the colorful difference between red and green is erased into a boring brown, and the difference between the beauty of black and the beauty of white is reduced to a boring gray. Thus, we have simultaneously made them the most sexualized and the least sexualized culture in human history. For on the one hand, we've weakened the moral constraints against uninhibited sex, and on the other hand, we've made the sex much more boring than it ever was before, by erasing the excitement of the constraints and also the excitement of the differences. And we've persuaded them to label any questioning of this new unisexist orthodoxy as male chauvinist piggery, or at least injustice, since we have reduced justice to equality. Of course, that's another obvious big lie, for it's just as unjust to treat unequals equally as it is to treat equals unequally. But remember, they love to believe big lies. Because of this confusion about justice, we have succeeded in making many Catholics, even some bishops and theologians, to feel intimidated by those who hate them the most, namely the hard, angry so-called feminists. Of course, it's another big lie in calling them feminists. That's like calling cannibals chefs. They are the bitterest enemies of everything feminine. They resent their wombs because they want to be as randy and selfish and irresponsible as the men who use them and abuse them. Far more than any mere male chauvinists do, they hate and fear God's masterpiece, femininity. So naturally, they claim to be the lovers and defenders of it. So we must help them to replace the Madonna with Madonna as their image of what a woman is. See that little word, the, that separates a saint from a slut? Replacing the Virgin Mother with the anti-virgin anti-mother is our first step towards replacing Christ with Antichrist. Persuade them to treat Mary as a soft, sugary sweet, fragile, harmless object of devotion for little old ladies and little old men. Don't let them see her as God's greatest weapon against our Father below, the new Eve who reversed the sin of the first Eve and whose seed crushed the head of our Father below. Don't let what happened in Mexico 5 centuries ago happen again. Keep those Aztecs in power. Americans, by the way, now sacrifice 1 out of every 4 of their unborn children to the Lord of Death, just as the Aztecs did to 1 out of every 4 of their born children. So don't let a spiritual Cortez arise to put a stop to that and pave the way for another Guadalupe miracle. And by the way, be sure you persuade married men not to listen seriously to their own wives, who speak in the name of nature, earth, instinct, family tradition, and common sense and true practicality. Persuade the men that they know what's really important. After all, they live in the real world, the world of business reports, growth graphs, computer chips, numbers, ideologies, money, war, or political power games. Don't let them see that a woman is the most powerful thing in the world, because from her womb issues the thing that is greater than the universe, a person, an immortal soul, joined into one being with a mortal body, of infinite value and destined for infinite and eternal joy. Ugh. Don't let them see a woman that way, as the enemy does. Make them see a woman either as an object of sexual play for a man, as the chauvinists do, or as an inferior man, a soft man, a mistake of nature that demands to be corrected, as the feminists do. A 6th principle is yuppieism, or hedonism. Make them shoppers instead of saints. Soft, spoiled, self-indulgent consumerists, utterly addicted to the comforts of this world and utterly unwilling and eventually unable to practice sacrifice and embrace suffering. In other words, continue to undermine the one virtue that is absolutely necessary to practice any other virtue at all, namely courage. Let them have Christ as long as they don't have him on the cross. The Muslims embrace the cross without Christ. That's why they're winning the Western world from Christians who are embracing Christ without the cross. Of course, Christ with the cross will conquer everything, but the cross without Christ will never conquer the cross. The Christ without the cross will never conquer the cross without Christ. For those who have Christ without the cross don't have the real Christ at all. They have a yuppie revision of their own devising. Don't let them learn anything from the Muslims. Have them demonize all Muslims as terrorists, or at least sneer at them as fundamentalists. Let them feel superior about not feeling superior. Let them feel intolerant about not tolerating the intolerant. Let them feel judgmental about not being judgmental. And let them be absolute about their relativism. So have them fear the Muslims, who are the honest enemies without, more than they fear their own Judas Iscariots, who are their dishonest enemies within. The secularists and the relativists who have corrupted the church. They can be persuaded to do this because they're yuppies, because they worship themselves and their own comfort. So persuade them to be everything Muslims are not. If Muslims are strong, they must be weak, but have them call this compassion. If Muslims are faithful, they must be faithless. Have them call fidelity fanaticism, and have them call infidelity sophistication and maturity and nuancing. And if Muslims are unselfish and willing to sacrifice their own personal and present gratifications by having large families, they must be taught to be self-indulgent and self-centered and childless. That way, the Muslims can take over the civilization that used to be called Christendom without shedding a drop of blood, because they will produce more of the world's most powerful weapons, mothers. Seventh, be sure they love spirituality instead of religion. Be sure they spiritualize and psychologize everything, even the sacraments, even the incarnation, even the resurrection. Keep them on the road to the heresy of Gnosticism, which is the worship of spirituality instead of God. That's our religion, after all, spirituality. The most evil being in all reality is our Father below, who is a pure spirit. On the other hand, all matter is good because it was created by the enemy, who continues his incarnation in it through material sacraments. So, Catholics must be persuaded to substitute spirituality for sanctity, to substitute the subjective good for the objective good, subjective truth for objective truth, pop psychology for divine revelation, tolerance for love, fashionable feelings of concern for genuine passionate philanthropy, political correctness for fidelity to dogma, I feel for I believe, what's true for me for what's true, self-esteem for repentance, and the church of cheap grace for the bloody mystery of the cross. Give them a church in which a bloodless God saves a sinless man from nastiness to niceness, not from hell to heaven. And of course, don't let them be moral absolutists. Persuade them that the worst thing in the world is not sin or damnation, but fanaticism. Let that be their new F word. Don't let them remember that all the saints in history were moral absolutists. Make them fall in love with niceness, not saintliness. Remind them that saints, unlike pop psychologists, make trouble. That saints are always countercultural in every culture until the culture of heaven. Make them feel ashamed of being different. Make them aspire not to superiority, but to sameness. Not to excellence, but to egalitarianism. Then they will be innocuous and harmless. For no one buys a product that advertises itself this way. Coke is not one bit more the real thing than Pepsi. Please don't think we're claiming that Hertz gives you a better deal than it is. That would be judgmental. Get them to believe that the only sin is making someone upset. Anyone except the enemy. Replace the fear of God with the fear of man. Make them believe that Jesus promised them that the world would love them. Actually, Actually, he said that it would love them just as it loved him. Contrive to have them miss the irony in that saying and forget that the world loved him so much that it murdered him. By the way, be sure they don't see that dangerous movie made by Mel Gibson. Inoculate them against it by calling it names like sadistic and primitive and simplistic. And if they must see it, don't let them see it alone. Now, the more you persuade them of all these things, the more phony they will become. The persuasion must take place unconsciously, of course, not by any attempt at rational argument. These ideas make no sense at all in the light of day. So your very first strategic rule must be to dim the lights. And to that end, we have supplied you with many establishment philosophers who assure their students that the truth is that there is no truth, that it is an absolute, that there are no absolutes, that everything is relative except relativism, and that reason is a dead white European religious plot to rape the minds of women and oppress slaves, liberals, and atheists who are the only free thinkers. Remember, the bigger the lie, the more the suckers. Now, let me throw away my devil horns. Oh, I can't get his tail off. We'll play around with him. Let me change hats now and give you 7 points of advice on how not to lose the culture war. If we know Screwtape strategy, we know Christ's counter-strategy. First, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, his dirty coins with his ugly face on them, and give to God what is God's, which is your beautiful soul with his beautiful image imprinted on it. Since you are fighting Christ's war, use Christ's weapons. What are they? Not politics, not power, not pragmatism, not persuasion by diplomacy. Christ could have used all those weapons and won the world. He could have marched on Rome and become the new Caesar. Instead, he let himself be crucified by Caesar. It sounds crazy, but it won something better than the world. It won the next world. And he asks us to join his kingdom, not Caesar's. Jesus Christ is not running for president. Don't politicize the faith. Don't reverse means and ends, natural and supernatural, temporal and eternal. Read not the times, read the eternities. Political involvement and social activism and social justice and social peace are all very, very good things, but they are not God. Only God is God. There is no God but God. Let's be at least as wise as the Muslims and say that 5 times a day. Remind ourselves of the first and greatest commandment. What were Christ's weapons, if not politics? Only 2, truth and love, because that's what God's made of. The Trinity is not a political system. It's a family. And so is the church. Politics, in the end, has to be based on force and on soldiers and on cops and lawyers. Second, stop the happy talk. You're at war. Shut up and fight. Fight with words, too. And fight with verve and joy and gladness, because this war against principalities and powers of wickedness in high places, this war is the one absolutely just war in the world. Hold your head high. It's a glorious war. Other wars are ugly. This one is beautiful. Third, don't be an organization man or an organization woman. If you're a Catholic, you are part of an organism, not part of an organization. You're not Jesus' middle manager, you're his middle toe. Be Mary instead of Martha. When Jesus comes to your house, stop cleaning the house and clean your mind instead by sitting in front of him and listening to him. And what will happen if you do that? The same thing that happened to all the saints. Yes, it's dangerous. You will not be left alone. You will be shaken and shook and shattered, and then put together again. And when you pray, don't be a Martha either. Be a contemplative. Practice the presence of God. That's the essence of prayer, because it's the essence of sanity. Don't be phony. Be real. Be sane. Live in the real world. The real world is the world where God is the origin and center and meaning and end of all things without exception. Prayer is the best way to get sane, to condition yourself out of phoniness and into realism. Fourth, forget fashion and neo-worship. Attach yourself not to the clock, but to Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Be a Christ absolutist. There is only one absolute in all of history, one literally eternal reality in all of time, one supernatural reality in the natural world. It's the one we still adore in the Eucharist. Fifth, we must conquer the sexual revolution and sexual egalitarianism. I emphasize that aspect of the sexual revolution because otherwise I couldn't get an E into the spelling of phonies. The origin of the moral relativism that justifies the sexual revolution is not intellectual, it's moral. We're not confused about moral absolutes, we're afraid of moral absolutes. But our moral relativism is almost exclusively sexual. Nobody defends nuclear war or insider trading or oil spills, but if it has anything to do with sex, it's justified and sanctified and glorified, even if it's murder. I'll give you two examples of murder justified in the name of sex. One is divorce. Divorce is a form of suicide, and suicide is a form of murder. Divorce is a form of suicide because it's the suicide of the one flesh that was created by marriage. The basic unit of society is the family. Suppose there was a society in which half the citizens committed suicide. What a desperately sick society that would be. Well, that's us. 50% divorce rate. The only institution in the world that says no to divorce is the Catholic Church. It's all about sex. Imagine there was some other practice, not connected with sex, as divorce is, that had the same three very clearly and strongly documented effects as divorce has. First, it violated the most serious oath, the most important promise you ever made in your life to the most important person in your life. So it made you into a liar and a cheater and a betrayer. Second, it harmed the innocent children that you brought into the world more deeply than anything except direct physical or sexual abuse, scarred them for life, and made it much more difficult for them to be happy and stable persons in or out of their marriages. Third, it destroyed the single most essential building block of your society and every society in history, the family, so that it destroyed not only the new one-flesh person that you and your spouse brought into the world, and the happiness of the children for whom you are responsible, but also your whole society. Now, would any society tolerate such a thing? Of course not, unless it was part of the sexual revolution. Take abortion as a second example. Is there any other example of murdering the innocent that is tolerated in our society? None. Why is this tolerated? Because it's part of the sexual revolution. Abortion is about sex. Why does any woman want abortion? Her birth control failed. Abortion is last-ditch backup birth control. What's birth control? It's the demand to have sex without having babies. Every single issue on which there is dissent in the church today is about sex. Feminism, inclusive language, homosexuality, contraception, abortion, fornication, divorce and remarriage, all dissent is about sexual morality. Every argument I've ever had with moral relativists has always come down to that issue in the last resort, if the argument goes on long enough. And no society of moral relativists has ever survived. The real terrorist threat to our society is the dictatorship of relativism. And the origin of moral relativism is the sexual revolution. So what's our answer to the sexual revolution? Well, God has provided an answer, just as he provided new insights and new creeds to every heresy in history. And I think God's answer for our day is the theology of the body of John Paul the Great. Reading that today is like reading St. Augustine in the 5th century, or Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, or the Council of Trent in the 16th century. It is the heavenly truth about sex. It's the big picture. It's the plug in the dike of our society that is cracking. Sixth, don't be a yuppie, be a saint. You're part of the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of this world. Learn the moves of your Lord. Forget yourself, sacrifice, give. It's the secret of joy. Try it, you'll like it. There's two kinds of love. There's love and lust. There's charity and cupidity. There's giving and getting. There's unselfish and selfish love. There's agape and eros. And just as selfishness seems to be the way to happiness, but is really always the infallible and inevitable way to misery, so self-sacrifice out of love seems to be the way to misery, but it is really the guaranteed way to joy. Experience the thrill of self-sacrifice and self-forgetfulness. If you can't do it out of love, though, don't do it, because then it won't give you joy. If you can't give cheerfully, don't give. The Lord blesses a cheerful giver, especially a giver of the self, the greatest gift of all. Why are Muslims growing much faster than Christians in Western civilization? Our own scriptures give us the embarrassing answer. Because God promised triumph over both natural and supernatural enemies to all those who obey his will and his law. And he promised defeat to all those who disobey. If Christians continue to abort, contracept, divorce, fornicate, sodomize, dishonor, and lie more than Muslims do, the Muslims will conquer the Christian world. Our competition with Islam is not about oil, or about money, or about political power, or even about terrorism. It's about saints. The religion with the most saints will win the world. That's how we won it once, that's how we're losing it, and that's how we have to win it again. And the way to become a saint is very easy to understand and very hard to do. It is simply to give God everything. To say that one word of Mary's, fiat, let it be done to me according to your will. T.S. Eliot defined being a Christian as, quote, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. Start with the mind. All that we are is made of our thoughts. Sow a thought, reap an act. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. St. Paul tells us, take every thought captive to Christ. Finally, seventh, don't try to be spiritual, try to be holy. Understand who our enemy is. Evil spirits. Not psychological miseries or maladjustments or false ideologies or philosophies. And the colonies of this enemy in our own souls are our own sins. Every sin is a drop of blood drained like Dracula from the mystical body of Christ. And every act of love is a drink of cold water given to every thirsty soul in that body. There are no victimless crimes. We help or harm the spiritual health of every single cell in that body, that is, every single person in the world, by every single thought and choice that we ever make. The salvation of all is dependent on the sanctity of each. The more you love your neighbor, the more likely it is that you'll see him again. So, in a single word, be real. Don't be a phony, be a saint. It's the only way to win the world. The only way to win the only war worth winning.